Hey there, everyone. Russ Hamilton here. Anyway, I've been playing around with a little bit of technology lately. And one of the things that I did was I cloned my voice and I put it up against one of the articles that I wrote a while back. And I got a pretty good result out of it. But it seemed a little bit dry. It seemed a little bit formulaic. And to be quite honest, it just sounded like I was reading and only reading that which I'd written. So I decided to try and, do an actual recording in which I kind of go over all of the principles that are inside this particular article. And I hope it sounds a little bit more like I'm just talking to you, my brothers and sisters in corrections, rather than just reading you some kind of script. So that, or rather this, is an effort to try and, really come up with a podcast that everyone's going to like. So if you like this, share it. If you like this, go ahead and subscribe to whatever format you find this in. Above all else, feedback is very much welcome. And that would go a long ways toward hopefully promoting this and making it something exciting, something valuable, and something that you can really rely on in your day-to-day work. And the actual subject of this particular podcast is going to be over communication in corrections. So what is over communication in corrections? Well, it's just kind of a series of things that I came up with to try and identify when inmates are being dishonest, when they're being deceitful, most of all, when they're trying to hide some type of illegal or illicit activity. And so hopefully that's going to be something that you can use to really get ahead, to get a jump on these people when they are trying to do something that's potentially dangerous or life-threatening. So there's a fundamental difference, in my mind at least, of officers that simply observe and respond to incidents and those who actually prevent them from happening. I've spent like 3 decades in this particular profession in one form or another. I began my career in San Quentin back in 1989. And so from there, I eventually transferred to a smaller prison, but we still had like 4,000 or 5,000 inmates. And then after that, after I retired, I went to work as a senior juvenile correctional officer at a local county facility. After that, I went to work for a private company where we do reentry and rehabilitation work at a local county jail where I'm a case manager and for a local county probation department. So I hope that you'll see that maybe I have a little bit of experience in this and this might be worth listening to. So over communication is one of the most reliable indicators to me that an inmate is hiding something, but it's often underutilized. And so this is hopefully going to transform your ability to detect what I've spoken about before. So exactly what is overcommunication? So at its core, overcommunication occurs when an inmate provides you with information that seems immediately irrelevant, inappropriate, or above and beyond what you would normally expect. Now, it's true that everybody has a baseline and not all inmates are the same. So knowing what their baseline is, kind of having a little bit of guidance as to how they normally act is helpful, but it's not always essential. But that is something that you should keep in mind. The irony is when they're engaged in this, they're usually trying to appear normal. They're usually trying to appear innocent. And by doing that, they actually tend to telegraph their guilt. It's the conversational equivalent of the old advice about the more details that someone adds to the story, the more likely they're fabricating it. This kind of is the difference, if you will, between trying to communicate information or trying to convince you of something. Anytime that you feel an inmate is trying to convince you of something, it's a reason to look deeper, it's a reason to investigate, and it's a reason to try and figure out actually what they're doing. So unsolicited overcommunication means they just kind of volunteer this all on their own, happens when inmates volunteer information without any prompting from you. This can be anything from verbal responses to subtle physical tells and everything in between. The key is recognizing when their behavior doesn't match the situation. So I'll give you this one, I think it's a concrete example of exactly what I'm talking about. So I was conducting this routine security check in a housing unit, and there was maybe 15 or so inmates inside this one particular dorm. And as I walked through, I noticed this pillow was a little bit oddly positioned, but it wasn't anything that just like rang any alarm bells yet. But I went on down and I moved the pillow aside, and underneath there was a cell phone. And so the first thing that I did is I grabbed the cell phone, I took a quick look at it, and then, just out of kind of sheer desperation, because I didn't think I could actually assign it to the one guy's bunk it was on because of the way the pillow was. It made me think like someone had stashed it there in a hurry. I just kind of looked around the room and held it up above my head and said, "Hey, whose cell phone is this?" Now, to my surprise, one of the inmates actually, he didn't quite raise his hand, but he was like, "Oh, that's mine." And so that was when I immediately knew that he was over communicating things to me. No inmate in his right mind is going to immediately volunteer that, hey, that contraband is mine. That's just not the way it works. So, with that in mind, the first thing I did was I thought I was in a position where this might be dangerous. I might get jumped. I froze everybody in position, called for my backup, and we got everybody down there and started looking around. We eventually, in that immediate area, recovered 2 BlackBerry devices. So what was really going on there? Well, the truth of the matter is this guy thought that by raising his hand and vouching that that particular piece of contraband was his, that I would just end up writing him up, maybe handcuffing him, taking him down to the office, whatever we were doing at that time, and that would be the end of it. It was an attempt to get me out of there and onto something else. The value of these devices inside that particular housing unit at the time was they were going between $3,000 and $5,000. So mostly you only had those inmates at the top of the food chain who were actually able to get things like that in, and those who were dealing drugs and doing other things to be able to actually afford something like that. And so it was his attempt at stopping me from going further. So that's just, one example that I can give you. But unsolicited communication, it's not always verbal. It's sometimes what I call under communication. And I once walked past this communal bathroom, just as another story here. And there was this particular inmate, and you could see right away, the deer in the headlights look, and he's just standing there and he's doing absolutely nothing. So that kind of over communicated to me that something else was going on. It put me in a position that, hey, now I have to take a look at something going a little bit further. I went ahead, I patted him down, I sent him out of the area, and then I started looking around, and up underneath the sink that he was right next to was a phone. And I was actually able, through pictures that were on the phone, to say with absolute certainty, through constructive possession, of course, that that telephone was indeed his. So sometimes there's this stillness of communication that just telegraphs, hey, something's going on. I'm guilty. I don't know what to do. I'm fidgeting, messing with my hair. I'm doing something with my hands. But all of that, whether verbal or nonverbal, is a form of overcommunication. So now there's another form of overcommunication, which I call solicited overcommunication. And this is what I call the art of the non-confrontational interview. When you're confrontational with a subject, you tend to put them on the defense. They tend to be in a position where they already know that you suspect something or they're worried about giving something away. So they freeze up a little bit. They're less likely to try and impart some sort of knowledge to you, and they're less likely to try and convince you of something. That still may happen, but if you're non-confrontational and if you merely try and elicit a response from them, sometimes you can get a lot further into that particular scenario than if you just go in there in an authoritarian way so that you cause them to immediately go to the defensive side. So the critical element in solicited overcommunication is maintaining this non-confrontational posture. If you come at someone aggressively with, did you do it? Were you involved? Are you a gang member? Whatever it is that you're trying to get to, they're going to automatically go blank. When someone is being truthful, they typically provide straightforward answers without embellishment. They don't generally add unnecessary details. They don't necessarily volunteer much more than that. And so that is what we look for, but that's not always the baseline. Everyone's a little bit different. So you have to mold this towards the individual that you're dealing with if you already kind of know what their baseline is. So some of the phrases that they typically use is they'll say things like, I'm not like that anymore, or there's no violence in my jacket, or yeah, I used to run with a gang, but I don't anymore. And so you'll hear them try and minimize their past behavior and they'll try and, convince you that they're involved in some type of change process, which they may well be, where they're no longer doing anything nefarious, underhanded, illegal, immoral, or unethical. Their bunk area or in their dorm or in their cell or out on the yard, whatever it is, because now they're true angels. So let me be clear about one thing. This is not something that you can use in a courtroom. This is something that you use out in the field. You can't write in a disciplinary that, oh, he was over communicating. But what you can do is you can use it as this further investigative tool. So I consider there to be 3 channels of detection with regards to this. Whether you're dealing with the solicited type or the unsolicited type, the 3 channels are physical, body language, and verbal. I already talked a little bit about the physical responses with the deer in the headlights look, somebody freezing up, someone maybe they start to stutter, they change their breathing pattern, they shift their posture. Body language kind of, encompasses everything from how they position themselves in space to micro expressions. Well, sometimes you'll catch a look on their face. Verbal responses are kind of the most obvious, but they vary a lot. And so you can't always rely on them. But anytime, like I say, that they get into that phase where they are being convincing rather than just merely communicating information, it's worth checking out even more. So this is what I call moving beyond observe and report. This is what separates rookies from journeymen in corrections. Rookies, they observe, they report, then they act or they react, and they don't generally do anything outside of those corners of what the job is. The next level of professionalism, though, is prevention and preemption. It's about seeing the incident before it happens, recognizing patterns, seeing the setup before it's executed, and identifying the players in the situation before they have a chance to make their next move. So this, as I said, over-communication is one of the primary tools that I've used so many times to catch guys with things, to identify a riot or a fight before it even happens. Sometimes this could be the equivalent of that gut feeling that you get where your subconscious dwells on these little pieces of over-communication and lets you know that something is wrong. So putting this into practice, start paying attention to those moments during your daily rounds when an inmate volunteers information you didn't ask for. Start asking yourself why and see if it leads to a different conclusion than the inmate intended. When the conversation feels like they're trying to convince you rather than inform you, trust that instinct. The beauty of overcommunication as a tactical awareness tool is that it works whether inmates know about it or not. They can't help but telegraph their concerns because we as humans are fundamentally bad at hiding stress and deception at the same time. It overloads the circuits, and there's always going to be a tell with regards to it. If you've heard that term tell before, you'll recognize it from poker. People have a certain thing that they do when they're holding a good hand or when they're holding a bad hand. It might be twisting the ring. It might be a certain way they hold their head, but all of those things are the things that we use to observe and develop an insight as to whether or not there's something here that we really need to investigate further. So this isn't about being paranoid or seeing conspiracy in every interaction. There's a lot of things out there that truly mean nothing. This is a way, though, to start separating those things, to think critically, to act decisively, and to be a better all-around corrections professional. Over-communication really represents the difference between reactive and proactive corrections work. It's the difference between writing reports about incidents that already happened and preventing those incidents from occurring in the first place. When an inmate tells you, oh, there's nothing to see, we weren't doing anything here, that's precisely when you need to look closer. Maybe. When they're trying to convince you that they're innocent before you've even asked the question, that's when you'll know you may be onto something. And that's when their behavior, whether verbal, physical, or through body language, seems just slightly off from what the situation calls for. That's your cue. So, after 30 years in this profession, I can tell you that mastering this principle will make you more effective. It will make your institution more secure and your career more successful. These inmates, they're always communicating, they're always telling you things, whether you realize it or not. And it's often very subtle, it's often very hard to detect. But now that I've given you this one little tool, I hope you'll take it out there and really start to make a difference and a real impact on the safety and security of your institution. So everyone, stay frosty, stay aware, stay safe. This is Russ Hamilton. I'm signing off. I hope you will join me in the near future for more podcasts just like this.